Hey folks, Arisilde here, and today we're going to be doing a commission. It was requested that I make a movement system for a character based off the old PlayStation game Kingsfield 1. Now that game has an absolutely awful control scheme, so we're going to be doing something more like a spiritual successor. I'm going to try to update it a bit and make it a little bit more user-friendly, a little bit more like modern sensibilities. Kingsfield, for whatever reason, has what is in essence a first-person tank control, like early Silent Hill or Resident Evil type games, where up and down is always forward and backwards, and left and right is to turn. And then weirdly, the other thumbstick is to look up and down. So you're trying to navigate in all four directions on the one thumb and looking up and down on the other thumb, and it's backwards. And then if you're playing the original game, you don't even get to use the thumbs. Looking up and down is on the triggers, which is pretty strange. So we're going to bring that more to modern sensibilities, where moving forward and backward and strafing left and right is on one thumbstick, and then your looking is on the other thumbstick. But in all other ways, it's going to be the same. So, starting with a basic puppet, we don't really need any of this stuff, so we're going to get rid of it. Keep the controller. We actually really don't need any of this. We'll put this aside because we'll use it later, most likely, but we're not going to use it now. We're going to use local thumbs rather than global thumbs, because you want the exact thumbstick coordinates in order to feed them into the mover. And nope, the advanced rotator. Advanced mover, advanced rotator. In order to get the signals that we need, we are going to use a splitter for each. We're going to take the left thumb into that one, right thumb into that one. Oh, we don't need that anymore. So, whoops. Left thumb is going to be on moving, like we said. So first of all, we want this on local space movement. We're going to get rid of everything having to do with the Z, because we won't be using the Z. I like to do strength up and dampening up, because it gives you more fine control of your puppet. If you find that those are too strong, you can always tone them down, but I think that 100% is a good benchmark to start. I like to use 5, just because it seems to be a nice even speed, and then it's a nice multiple in case you want to use math to change speed with a leveling system or equipment or what have you. X is actually going to be negative, because the thumbstick direction actually outputs the opposite direction that you would expect. And I can show you that in a minute, but negative on the X, positive on the Y. And then we just pipe them in. Make sure that these are both multiply, or modulate really, which will multiply the positive to -1 signal that you get from the thumbstick against whatever number you put in here. The other thing I want to do real fast, well, let me just do this before I forget, so that it's not constantly rotating some goofy way. Put those all to 0 for now, because we're not going to use them. We will be using Y, but we're not going to do it right now. The other thing I want to do is put a camera pointer in here while testing, so that we can actually see the puppet a little bit better. If you use the default camera, the camera tries to swing around whenever the puppet's moving, And that is not what we want, because we want to be able to reference the direction that we're going specifically. So we'll go with that. And let's give it a test. I like to do test mode. So pressing right, he's going right. Left, he's going left. Pressing up, he goes forward. Pressing down, he goes back. So that is what we want. And if you press any other random direction, it will combine the signals. So that's working just fine. Nope. Always do that when exiting play mode or test mode. Always end up clicking on something. You have to click off into nothing. Otherwise it closes things. All right, so same thing for the rotator. We're using X because that's what you want when you're looking side to side, or when you're rotating side to side. And for that, if you look on the puppet, you will see that Y is the one that actually rotates the puppet around his vertical axis. So that's what we want to do. And if memory serves, that one's going to have to be a negative. And I'll just use 90 because that's just a nice even number. Not too fast, not too slow. And we'll give that a test. So pressing left. Nope, got it backwards. Or did we? What I forgot to do was make sure this was on modulate. Pressing left, pressing right. Everything is working as expected. So, just to recap. Left stick, forward, reverse, strafe left and right. Right stick is turning left and right. Well, then we got to work on something for looking up and down. And there's a couple of different things you can do. Media Molecule did a thing where they, on their first person rig that they put out, they stuck a camera to the face, which is what we'll do. We're just not going to do it yet. But then they animated the puppet and they leaned it. They leaned like the whole, not that. They leaned like the whole torso back. I need to turn this off. I can't actually do this. All right, so they animated, not the arm. Apparently I'm terrible at this. This is why I don't animate, folks. But anyway, so they keyframed looking down and looking up, and then they modulate between it based on the intensity of the signal that they're sending out, which is fine. We're probably not going to do that. So what we're going to do is actually just make a new head. We're not going to worry about making a fancy animation. I'm going to make what is basically a custom camera rig attached to this head. For that, we need to get rid of the connectors. And I'll just get rid of the head and the neck. And then I will stop editing connectors so I don't accidentally mess any up. X-ray is not necessary. I need the grid. I think I'm going to go with a smaller grid because I need one where the center of the grid is directly above the body, just to make this a little easier. We'll use a circle also to make this easier. So that's about centered. We'll shrink it down to about head size. I'm calling that one good. So we're going to put that there. Exit sculpture, because that's good enough. We are going to get rid of, Let's just power the camera pointer off, just in case we need it later. Because we're switching to a first-person camera, which I will shrink just to make this easier. Now, if you haven't messed with cameras much before, the location, well, let me just stamp it down. So the location the cameras start their viewing angle from is actually the very back against the chip, not the front of the lens like you'd expect. It's kind of deceptive. I really wish they'd change that, because it causes extra problems with stuff like what we're about to do, actually. Whenever you want to do something where you have a rotating camera or anything like that, you typically want to put it onto another piece somewhere in order to rotate it. But then the camera is actually viewing from inside of an object, which is not great because you see this weird blur. This is me trying to look from the inside of the sphere out. That's not great. Which is fine because it's going to be invisible anyway, but it's not so great while you're testing because you want to be able to see the sphere. You want to be able to see the camera, like you want to see everything. It's just a little obnoxious. Also, it gives you a funky offset from what you're expecting, but you get used to it, I guess. So the next step is to connect these two. That disappears because it's grouped. So X-ray needs to be on, we'll be able to see it. And now you can see, if I rotate the sphere, it rotates the camera. I'm probably gonna have to move that at some point. It's probably gonna have to be, nope. Scope in, then move it. It's probably gonna need to be one further out because if I look down, I want to be able to look down my chest. That did not rotate from the center. There we go. I might actually need to move this forward a little bit. Because right now, if he looks down, well, it's kind of ridiculous because of the grid. So let's turn off the grid. So now you can see his belly. That might still be a little bit too far back, because you kind of want to be able to view straight down your body in a situation like this, which isn't really realistic. But for now, the other step, nope, is the connector. So we're going to want a ball joint. It doesn't matter where you put it, because we'll just adjust it in a minute. The only thing you have to worry about is you put the first connector onto the part that's not going to move, and you put the second connector on the part that you're expecting to move. So in this case, it's the body. And then we'll shrink it down. No, that's not what I meant to do. It's much easier to work on these when they're not gigantic. So we'll move that. Want that in the center of the head. That way, that's our center of rotation. And then we'll move this guy up. Get it back on the grid, because for some reason it jumped off the grid. Make sure all the points are on the grid. That's on the grid. This is still on the grid. Then going into edit, use limit. Realistically, no, you probably can't look straight up. And well, yeah, not all that. Let's go down a little bit. Let's say 150. We'll just leave it there for now. And all that does is limit it, so when you move, it can only go that far instead of jumping everywhere. However, there is kind of a weirdness. If you keep pressing, it'll jump back to the other side, which seems a little odd. I wish they wouldn't do that, but again, is what it is. Now, just for being lazy's sake, we're going to just power this with a switch, but we'll fix that later probably. So now, if we go into play mode, we notice that I forgot. Actually, why did that do that? Probably the mass of this head. Let's go with non-collidable and ignore gravity and see if that helps. That does help. Apparently his head was just too heavy. Also, I would like to force possess, because that's just easier. And then we want to get rid of motion sensor so that he stays upright. We also want to get rid of, I don't really want lean lag for this. I don't really want anticipate turn for this. I also don't want it following the imp. Where is that at? I do not remember where that's at. I think that's it. All right, so let's give this another try. So therein lies another problem. When you connect it like this, it is taking all of the animation from the entire body. So if you are using procedural animation, see how much the head bobs around. So that's not going to work. Also, the head being weightless is not apparently working. So let's just turn the density down. Turn off ignore gravity. Let's rewind. See how this behaves. And he's still drifting. What is up with this? Could it be? Let's just start these both at 50. And that seems to have done it. All right. mission accomplished there. So now we need something to control the vertical movement of the camera, which will then be off the R. It'll be off the Y, but we don't have anything telling this where to go. So we have a couple of options. So I think what we're going to do is something fairly similar to what the first person template is, but not exactly, because we're not going to animate the whole torso. We're just going to animate the head. And like I mentioned earlier, I do still think that the swivel point in the center of the head is wrong, so I'm going to move that a bit. And hopefully... Nope. Scope in. Yeah, no, see, now I got a better line of sight down the front. I could see all the way down. I could see his feet, but they seem to be in the ground for some reason. That's weird. Move the ground at some point. Let's fix that. Alright. Alright, I had to put the head back. Alright, so we got that. Ground's fixed. Now, what Media Molecule did was use a timer and use the speed setting, which acts a little bit different. So what the speed setting does, instead of just counting forward, it can count forward or backwards depending on what kind of signal you're sending it. So if you give it a +1, it's going forward. If you get a 0, it's not moving. -1, it's going backwards. That's pretty cool. Along with a timeline, you can get a lot of funky things. So on a timeline, you have what's called the playhead. When you have a wire active, you can see you can actually wire into the playhead. So if you wire the timer output into the playhead, that means the current time will control where on the timeline the playhead is. Current time is a 0 to 1 range. The entire timeline is also a 0 to 1 range. So interestingly, they can go, it can be a 1-to-1 ratio between the two. It doesn't matter how long the timeline is, so you can make it smaller so you can actually see it. It could also be as long as your entire screen still reacts exactly the same. So anything between 1 and 5 seconds would be the range of 0 to 1 because it's a percentile. But we're not using time really. We are going to attach it to the controller. So I'm just going to use a smaller time scale. You could use 0 to 1 if you wanted it. It would be kind of fast. So I'm going to use 2, see how 2 looks. And what we're going to do with that is on the timeline, I should probably start up here. On the timeline, I am going to keyframe nope, don't want that. Let's turn this off. Alright, so smoothly rotate all the way to the top. Leave it alone. We'll back on out of there. And nope, I erased my animation. That's fine. So put another one here. Only this time we'll go the opposite direction. is happening with his head? Just put the linear scaling on. It's just L1 and X. You can toggle between the different scaling types, or blending types rather, I'm sorry. And then make sure you pull this back until you see that green bar, otherwise there will be a gap behind it. And it'll work for a minute, and then when it maxes out, it'll jump to something else. So make sure that you pull it all the way in. And again, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be exactly 3 seconds. It doesn't have to be any particular amount of time. And that should be that. And then we're going to move these, put that there. Actually, there's one other thing that the media molecule one does that we can do. I don't think it really matters, but we're here and we might as well. They put in a little bit of signal smoothing. So whatever comes through the wire gets marginally smoothed. Again, I can't really tell the difference personally, but we'll put it in there. They did another whole section of smoothing where they split this Y into positive and negative and smoothed it and then put it back together and then went into the timer and then came out and did another smoother and then into the timeline. I can't tell the difference, so I'm going to leave it this way. The other thing we can do, I already did it. So I moved the pointer so that now if I test, I'm looking at the front and I can watch the head go up and down. I'm pressing up, I'm pressing down. It's moving fairly slow, you'll notice. The reason for that is this 2. So if I move it down to a 1 and start this on the middle, that way he's always looking forward. You can see if I move this, he moves up and down. So that's what the plus and minus coming out of the right thumb coming through the Y, it can be plus or minus depending on if you're pressing up or down, right? So that's what I was saying with the speed. If you give it a plus or a minus, it'll count up or count down. I'll leave this on the screen so we can watch that. So you can see pressing up gives you a negative because Y is negative up for some reason, even though that's not how it is in math. And down is positive. Now you have a looking head. Not too shabby. So let's turn these on, although I turned those off camera so that I could test that without it moving. I didn't change anything else. So now I forgot to turn the face camera back on, turn the pointer back off. And actually, while I'm here, let me make sure there's not anything else annoying in the animations. Like bounciness. Let's turn that off. In fact, let's sample the animation because we don't want the head moving around too much. What else can we change? Sway. Goodbye sway. Lumberiness. Sassiness. There it is. Now we have a nice smooth animation for the head. Let's see if we can get that to stop leaning forward and backwards. That would be breathiness. So that's going to make for a nice smooth camera. Let's give it a shot. I forgot one thing. This head needs to be invisible so it's not obstructing the camera. There you go. Now you see you don't have the blur. I can turn, walk, strafe, look up and down. I can see my little feets walking around. You'll notice I don't have a head. That's problematic. That looks a little bit weird. But we can fix that. Just gotta scope in until we get to here. Cast shadows always. Now I've got a head. What I don't have is a neck. So I think we will remedy that. I should probably actually get back on the grid so I don't mess this up. All right. Shouldn't see anything weird in the shadow. And you shouldn't ever be able to move your head enough to see your neck, obviously, so that should be fine. Nothing weird there. Nothing weird there. Later on, if we put an actual sculpt on the head, we'll have to make an invisible version so that the shadow of our head is correct. But for now, that circle's fine. I mean, this is just a test dummy to begin with. But there you go. Let's see, what else do we need now? I would say we probably need to adjust the speeds because one of the major things about Kingsfield is that it's extremely, extremely slow. So let's crank these down a little bit. I think I'll take them to 3 and see how miserable that feels. Because if you're not miserable, it's not Kingsfield. Because I don't know if you know, but Kingsfield is actually a precursor to the Dark Souls and Bloodborne and all those games. They're all from Software. Kingsfield 1 is actually the first game they ever made. Let's turn this, let's call that 45. Oh man, that is ungodly slow. That's a little too slow. We're not gonna go with that. Let me crank that back up just a little bit. Let's see, let's put that to 60. Why don't I ever just type these in? I don't know, but we're gonna do it. I'm gonna try to get in the habit. That's a little faster. So we can move. Moving still seems to be a little fast. Rotation still seems to be a little slow. Let's adjust. So let's go to 2.5. 2.5. Let's take that to 70. Yes, that feels like I'm walking through mud, which is exactly how Kingsfield is. All right. Well, I think that's it. I think that we will probably not worry about combat or anything yet. I think we'll do that in a later video. This one's actually gone on long enough. So hopefully you found that enlightening, and I will catch you in the next video.